right, everybody, welcome to another episode of UX Pathways. And I have the honor to be joined by Jeff Sauro. Jeff, how are you?
Doing great. How are you doing, Mark?
Good. Hey, I'm really interested to catch up with you. And I know you do many things. And I would love for you to explain to our audience, what is your current role?
My current role is the principal, the chief executive officer, if you will, of a UX research and software company here in Denver, Colorado. We have about 30 folks, mostly in Denver, but also across the US.
And you've written some books as well.
Written a few books, I think 6. We got a couple more in the works as well. Yep, on quantifying the user experience, customer analytics for dummies, benchmarking the user experience. So
just forth. A couple. So the question I always get is, so user experience, how did you stumble into this field?
Yeah, good question. And I've been in the field for over 20 years now. So I think probably like you and like a lot of others that have been into a little while, it wasn't called user experience at the time. And so for me, it was some combination of human factors and usability. The field was loosely referred to. My first introduction to it was as an undergrad. At Syracuse University, I wanted to produce television. So I went to the Newhouse School at the time. And as part of my admission to Syracuse University, they said, oh, we actually think you would also be a good fit for this School of Information, which also kind of housed the Library Science School. And I thought, I don't want to be a librarian. Why am I going to get into this? So I sort of had dual enrollment, sort of took both classes into it, had my internships at CNN. I was excited about that. Not so excited about maybe the lack of wages I would get by working in television news. But at that time, this was the early 90s. The first class I took was about sort of new technology, new concepts. And Netscape 1.0 just came out. Mosaic was out. These are the first web browsers in 1994. And so at the time, really the closest metaphor that a lot of people were making about the web was to television as a different type of form of medium. And so it was interesting seeing this contrast between traditional broadcasting and information technology. And my advisor at the time, who taught the course, who went on to be my advisor for my undergraduate thesis, was my first introduction to this. And he was trained in traditional psychology and information theory and communication. And my undergraduate thesis was a usability test at the then nascent New York Times website. And so we tested 80 people we had go through, and the nature of the thesis was to understand how designers and users think differently. Something that if you've been in the field for a while, you may be familiar with. You are not the user, and it's understanding to see how at the time the designers thought differently about the users. But I still have pictures of the New York Times website from back in 95, 96. And it was pretty funny because it showed how the medium was still very much mimicking the old mediums. So it was just a picture of the New York Times, like above the fold of the New York Times web, it looked like the newspaper. And so you would click on it. And it was really interesting because being in both the broadcasting and in IT, you see how this was an early manifestation of the medium, because some of the earliest movies were actually just people taking film cameras, going to the playhouse and videotape or filming plays, live action plays. And now we know as the medium evolved, how much that's changed. And certainly in the last 30 years, how much the web has changed. So that was my introduction to it at the time in the late 90s, early on. And then I got some professional experience after that.
So how did you start up your company? Was that just out of another sort of experiment that you ran and you said, hey, I should do this myself?
I should do this. Yeah. So I first started out in corporate America. So my first job out of undergrad was at General Electric. It was in their IT management, information management leadership program up in Schenectady, upstate New York, where you get trained at their traditional Crotonville campus, and you do these multiple modules throughout General Electric businesses. And so I started in the power systems division, and so I graduated this degree in IT, and I was sort of learning the trade. This was year 2000. Problems was dominating things. But I was able to start getting exposed to just little parts of interface evaluation. There was very few jobs that were dedicated into it. So you sort of had to find where those were. But part of the measurement program at the management program at GE, Six Sigma was a big thing at the time. Jack Welch was putting a lot of money behind it, and they hired all these statisticians to train up, hundreds of thousands of people across all GE businesses. The idea being, you can't have statisticians run companies because they don't know the specific nature of what's being built, the products. Instead, teach people who knew something about the product and the design statistics and to apply it. So I first was in power, and I didn't have much statistics or strong research training behind, outside of what we got in our IT program. So this was my first exposure to real applied systematic statistics and measurement. And I went through it once, and it was rather challenging concepts. So I think a lot of people, when they take their first statistics class, realize like, wow, this is more than just finite math. This is probability theory and everything, but applied. And so it was interesting. So I first took that in the power systems division. Then I transferred from upstate New York to Chicago into their medical systems divisions. And I just so happened to have to go back onto the training program through Six Sigma again. So I got it twice. And I thought, what a waste of my time. But it turned out it was one of the best things, because I really started to understand the concepts, how to apply them, getting the training. This was weeks of training that they took you out and took it. And so I thought, wow, this is great. And I was already doing usability testing. So at the time was heavily a qualitative approach. So, I did a lot of quantitative methods with what I did as my undergraduate thesis, but I was finding a lot was done in industry for what little work I was getting, very qualitative. The field had kind of branched into just, quick observation. Jacob Nielsen's early work at the time and his alert box columns heavily emphasized, just quick observation. This is when the somewhat now infamous article about you only need to test with 5 users was published. So this was very much what was going on, but learning the Six Sigma about what are your outcome measures, thinking about experimental design, I thought, wow, this really should be applied to what we're doing here in usability testing and human factors. Well, then of course the .com happened. I had professional training a couple of years at GE. I worked at a number of a startup that was all sorts of acquisitions that happened in Chicago, but this is the .com. Things went up. So if you had any background in user interface, information architecture, it was a goldmine. People were just coming after you. So it was great. Company went public. You were all excited about the stock options, thought you were going to retire. And then it all went to zero when the company went bankrupt. You lost your job. But 3 years of training, it was in an agency environment that the startup was at the time in Chicago for 3 years. And I then went on to work for Intuit, back traditional software companies, and then PeopleSoft, and then almost 10 years at PeopleSoft and Oracle after that as well. And in those stints, what I was particularly focusing on and learning as much as I could was applying measurement to a traditionally qualitative field that didn't have a lot of rigorous questions about how do you measure, how do you quantify usability and then user experience? How do you determine the sample size like we did when we learned about it in Six Sigma? How do you do the statistical calculations? And when you talk to a lot of people in the field, they would say, we don't know. We don't do that. We keep things qualitative so we don't have to answer those difficult questions that people in market research are asking about sample size. But I found there were a handful of people out there in the industry that were publishing. One was Jim Lewis at the time, and I just he was at IBM. I called him up. I say, hey, I see you've written a lot about sample size and statistical calculations. Have you looked at this? Have you looked at that? And it started a good professional relationship. I was at Oracle, he was at IBM. And I was doing a lot of statistical measurement at Oracle and Intuit, but I realized these large organizations only had so much need for large systematic measurement. Is still a lot of classic formative evaluation. And so I realized, boy, this would be something I want to do full time. I love the measurement. I love the evaluation. If I'm going to want to do this full time, I'm going to have to start my own company. And at the time I started writing what was called the Measuring Usability article, things that I was exploring and finding out with Jim Lewis. I wanted to get up there so people can see, get feedback on, see how other people are approaching this. Got to really meet a lot of folks. And that turned into a lot of opportunities to speak and meet folks. And I realized I think I can do this. Went on my own, started our company MeasuringU, and we've had employees now for over 10 years. And so it's been quite an adventure.
Yeah, it's exciting. And I know everything that you offer. So anyone that's thinking of getting into user experience, there's so much knowledge out there that you offer. And I really think that that's another common question that I always get is, okay, great. I understand that there's kind of a non-traditional path a lot of times to get into user experience.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm going to embark and I really want to focus on this is going to be my career, are there any words of advice that you typically will bestow on someone like, hey,
Yeah,
you should do this?
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a good question. And we have a decent sized research team here at Measuring You, a dozen plus researchers. So we're constantly evaluating and interviewing and hiring and training internally and externally. And we have the opportunity to see candidates who know very little or nothing about the field and some that know a lot about it. And the recommendations I'm going to give is based upon our experience sort of broadly from training and also from our hiring. And what really differentiates people, sort of candidates, if you want to get that job, just it's a handful of things. Number one, know the history, understand where UX came from, its roots in psychology and engineering and design and human factors. And there's a number of books on that. If you're even familiar with a handful of those common books by, like I mentioned, Jacob Nielsen and Don Norman, get to know some of the lingo. If you know what a prototype, a persona, an affordance, what is design thinking, what is a journey map? Every industry has its own jargon. When you're training and you hire somebody, the first 3 to 6 months sometimes is just, what does this term mean? What does that term mean? And of course, there's business terms, but there's all these specific UX terms. But you put yourself a leg ahead if you know what those really mean and have actually done those methods as well. I think understand some of those fundamental concepts. Number 3, what are the fundamental concepts of user research? It's really an early focus on users and tasks, iterative design, and empirical measurement. And this has been talked about since the 1980s. There's a handful of key articles that talk about that. If you can master, understanding the methods and the terms of one thing. 2, just getting a little bit of experience. Having run just one usability test with 10 participants will differentiate you from so many people because you'll know what's involved in seeing people that are doing things that you didn't expect, interacting, collecting that data and synthesizing that. That is a learning experience for you to see if this is something you want to do, and it helps differentiate you from candidates, but also learn the roles. There's a very much a distinction between designers and research, and now what we're often seeing between UX research ops. Those are distinct jobs with a distinct type of roles and training and particular behaviors and skills that you're going to have in each of those. And so we don't do a lot of design at Measuring You. We do a lot of research. And so people who have like a portfolio and talk a lot about design and the design experience, and then are applying to a UX research job, to us, it's say like, all right, do you want to go into UX research, or do you understand even the distinction between those particular roles? I think that's important, understanding how those break out. And of course, get to know some of the pivotal people. Reach out. There's a lot of folks out there that regularly publish. Ask them, shoot them a quick question. I try and answer them. Jim Lewis and I here at Measuring, we try and answer those whenever possible. But read the journals and publications, things that are published in the Journal of Usability Studies. It's much more approachable than maybe some of the traditional papers like that you would get out of the CHI proceedings. Like I mentioned, some of those books out there. And don't feel like you need an advanced degree to get into the field. Well, more than typically from the surveys that we do for the User Experience Professionals Association, we see about more than half of people do have an advanced degree, but a little less than half don't. You don't. I started out without my advanced degree. I had a bachelor's, then I went back and got the master's, and then my PhD after I realized this is exactly what I want to do. I want to focus in that. But a lot of people feel like they need to go back to get their master's, and maybe, but getting a little bit of professional experience, the practice is really going to help differentiate and get you the sort of experience you need to see if this is what you want to do.
Yeah, some great advice. I mean, I totally agree. Why spend all the time and effort if you're not 100% sure this is what you want to do? And then if you do exactly the same kind of situation, if you find out what you like, it's never too late to go back and then explore more, especially nowadays where
it's so much easier now than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago when I tried to do it. You have to leave in the middle of the day, physical campuses. There just wasn't Zooms. But now unfortunately, a lot of universities are online anyway. So you're just flipping onto a Zoom anyway.
Exactly. Well, I appreciate you taking the time and explaining your story. Where's the best place for people to find out more about you?
Yeah, come to MeasuringU.com. We publish articles every week. We're also on Twitter at MeasuringU as well. We put out things out on LinkedIn as well. You can follow us at MeasuringU, where we put out weekly original articles. Some we go really deep original research online, MeasuringU.com.
All right, perfect. Well, once again, Jeff, thanks for spending time today.
Thank you, Mark.